Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andy McGrogan. I'm the current president of the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police. I want to thank you all for coming, and if we've made you wait a little bit, apologize for that. We've actually, the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police is basically all of the municipal First Nation chiefs of police and the Assistant Commissioner of the RCMP in charge of K Division for Alberta. So we consist of approximately 10 chiefs, and basically we meet about, I'd say 4 times. We do meet 4 times a year and then have several teleconferences and impromptu meetings in between that time. Over the last 2 days, we've met in what we usually call the summer roundtable, where the executive board gets together to talk about topical issues that are facing us in Alberta. And I'll just give you an example of some of the issues that we discussed over the last couple of days. The naming of homicide victims, Police Act amendments, safe sobering sites, enhancing diversity in policing, opioid crises and community response, and we heard from the cannabis consultation group that are currently involved in going around the province and getting, I guess, information in relation to the cannabis legalization that's coming next year. So having said that, I do want to say that all of the chiefs were present, and 2 of the issues that I think are of concern or of topic are the naming of homicide victims. And I want to tell you that the chiefs have adopted, in principle, basically a decision framework that lays out how and we name and when we name homicide victims in investigations. And we had a team of legal folks that got together, lawyers and senior police officers from the police services and also from the Solicitor General. And I can tell you that we also asked our privacy commissioner to weigh in on this framework, which she did, and came back with a couple of recommendations which we have adopted in this framework. So specifically, I won't get into the details of the framework. I think all of you have been given a copy of it. But basically, we followed the principles. You haven't been given a copy yet? Okay. So basically, we followed the principles of law in relation to the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. And that's, of course, why we did consult with the Privacy Commissioner. If you take the principle that every person has privacy rights, including deceased folks, and it's the law, how do we work from there to name homicide victims, and how does that look? So I think this framework lays it out quite well. It's really, the chiefs, as I said, got together and agreed unanimously that this is a great protocol, and it will form basically the basis for how I think all of us across the province will make decisions in relation to naming homicide victims. So I don't know if there's any specific questions about that, but as I said, the chiefs are quite together on this protocol and feel that it's a strong protocol, and it will put us in good position to be more uniform. And as you know, the minister did ask the chiefs of police to get together and build a process and a framework that would allow or ensure that police services are acting similarly when it comes to this issue of naming homicide victims across the province. And I will say that the RCMP do follow different privacy legislation, but they were at the table as well today, and or the last 2 days, and agree that this framework conceptually makes sense, and agreed in principle to the framework.
Andy Keith with CTV News, could you give us a sense of how things might change from how you deal with naming homicide victims now to how you would think of doing it within this framework in the future, sir?
Well, I think the consensus around the room was it doesn't change a lot, other than it does lay out the basic framework and the law around it. But every homicide is unique, as we know, and we have to consider certain factors before we release the name. And I know one of the big issues is this whole public interest and versus the public interested. And how do we land on that in a way that's lawful? Because really, that's really the key to this. We're just acting within the legislation that's available. So I think what this framework did, and having our legal folks kind of iron this out, is it really gave a sense of exactly where we need to be. And I can tell you from Medicine Hat Police Service perspective, it was very helpful for us. I think in the past, we didn't consider some of the things that are now in this framework, and I think we'll do a better job following the framework and the law. when we have homicide victims in our jurisdiction, so I can only speak locally. As you can see, there are a number of chiefs here today that have their own local issues and are available to answer any specific questions after I'm done here in relation to the issues.
Doesn't this create a situation, though, potentially where people could be murdered anonymously in our communities?
In which?
People could be murdered anonymously in our communities.
Well, I think the framework is there. I don't know what murdered anonymously means to
Well,
you.
if police ever release the name, should somebody go unnamed if they have been murdered in our communities?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance again, and if you read the framework, you'll see that that there is just a lawful expectation of privacy, even for deceased folks. So that's where you start, and then I think you'll see if you read that framework, there are steps that we take to get to naming homicide victims in certain circumstance. You take into account, which we do, is the feeling of community safety is very important. So there's lots of different considerations, and so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we're always trying to be as transparent as we can with the communities, but we have to do it within the framework of the law.
Are police prepared to deal with FOIP requests from media, though, if the media feel that it's within the public's interest?
Well, we deal with FOIP requests daily and ongoingly. So again, the framework, if it allows for a FOIP request in relation to this, it would go through the FOIP process.
Just because we've kind of, I think, I speak for most would say that we've just had a look at it in the last few minutes.
Yes.
Could you say kind of in a nutshell what the framework says? Is it basically saying that it's up to the discretion of the police in balancing privacy requests with the public good? Like in a nutshell, could you just kind of say what this framework actually does?
What this framework does, in my view, and I think the view from the discussion around the table, is it basically lays out, first off, that there is law in relation to people's privacy. So if you take into account that if we start with the fact that a deceased person has privacy rights, so what is the law and how do we get to, I guess, Section 7, which I think what gives that now, I guess, opens up to, okay, if this section is appropriate, then we go under Section 32 of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, and then we look at, okay, so what is, and I think if you go to some of the sub-bullets in there, and of course we've dealt with a number of things over the last couple days, so I think A is one that the public good, so where it is in the public good to release the name, public consideration, not to be confused with 32, which is public interest, right? Transparency of police service is public body, increased public confidence. So all these things are considered. So I guess in a nutshell, we go through the legal framework and we kind of start there and we say, okay, now how, in what circumstance do we release the name? There could be an investigative need, which we all knew in the first place, but this lays out the framework, I think, in a lot. It's more or less like a checklist in my view.
Mr. Herbert, CBC Calgary. If I understand it, just reading briefly right now, you're saying the threshold to trigger the release of names fairly high. Here in Calgary, of course, we've been releasing the names, Edmonton, not necessarily always. So would you expect that it will be less likely here in Calgary that those names will be released going forward?
I think you'd have to talk to the chiefs in their jurisdiction. They have the same framework and they've agreed to it, and I think the whole idea is to, we're trying to always be consistent and transparent in our activities. So, but I can't speak for the specific chiefs in Calgary and Edmonton.
The names always come out, whether the police release them at all. So
right.
Why not at least appear to be transparent?
Well, if you see in the framework, it does talk about, let's say a deceased person is named in an information. So it seems, and I think it's explained quite well in here, on first blush, that would seem that, okay, the name's out, now we can just release it. But according to our legal folks, there are other considerations around that. Does it affect other people's privacy? Does it affect the dignity of the victim? So you can read them for yourself, but it's not as simple as the name's out there, so now we can release it. But I think there's a really strong case here that if it fits these criteria, that we can release the name.
Will you try and make it go into the court system? Because any trial I've been at, they always talk about the victim.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems to be layers of red tape that don't need to be there.
Well, I say this quite often. We don't make the laws, we follow them. And, there's a privacy.
But you're making this law.
I don't see it that way. We actually pulled the laws together and we're using it as a framework to follow. That's our view. Any other comments or questions in relation to that? Okay, thank you. And
Anything else? I think the news release about this availability, so you talked about fentanyl, the opioid crisis. Was there
Yeah.
anything you guys came together on?
Well, in relation to the opioid crisis, we talked, our Assistant Deputy Minister was here for both the days of the meetings, and he just basically gave us an overview of what the government response right now and the situation. So I guess that was more or less a briefing from our Assistant Deputy Minister. Enhancing diversity in policing was another issue that we talked about. It is a topical issue for, I think, all police service in Alberta and across the country. And as a group, we talked about how we can work better together to increase diversity and make it a more topical conversation and attract more diversity to police services. Because I think, as most of us know, we're predominantly, in most cases, white male, and we talked about how we can enhance that diversity and actually, and of course, embrace it in a way that will attract diversity to the services. Another topic that we discussed, and there's I guess the paper in front of you in relation to Police Act amendments. We asked a committee to get together and look at our Police Act. Our Police Act is very antiquated. If you go back to the 1800s, you'll find the RCMP Northwest Police Act. So they use some of the same language that our Police Act does today. I think the chiefs in general believe that it doesn't serve our citizens well at the way it's actually worded, that it's quite antiquated. It doesn't serve our members well, and it doesn't serve our organizations well. And when you think about even efficiency and effectiveness, we want to just look at it from that perspective. I think there's a lot of changes that can be made, and again, the committee that worked on this put together a number of recommendations which are in the paper that I think and really what we're trying to do is start the conversation in the province about changing the Police Act, and again, to be more transparent. I guess we're even suggesting a different governance in relation to public complaints and criminal investigations. So it's all laid out in there, and it's really meant to be a conversation piece to get this conversation going. Have the Alberta government look at this particular paper, and hoping that we can get this as a topic for legislative framework change in the near future.
Did you and your colleague? Sorry.
How do you plan on starting that conversation? Obviously, you've put together this committee, they have it, so what's the next step? Does the government get it? Do you guys get feedback? How does this work?
Yeah, so obviously from here we will send this document to the minister and ask that they view it and ask that they take action from, I guess, their perspective, and because there's we're obviously just one of many stakeholders in this whole piece of legislative change around the Police Act, but it's to the chiefs, it is an extremely important issue we have to move on it. It's time. It's costing the communities in time. It's very frustrating for even people that complain under the Act to get a result. We have very limited mechanisms for quick results, for resolutions that are a little more modern. Right now, if you think of the whole premise of employment, another aspect is employment, I guess, making our workplace safe and corrective. So if you think of things being in a corrective nature, the Act as it presently reads, as I said, from languages from centuries gone by, it really isn't modern, and it's difficult for us to correct behavior in a timely manner that would satisfy citizens and satisfy the police officers that are out there doing a really tough job on behalf of the services and on behalf of the community and the organizations that they serve.
Is there one or two particular areas that really hinder you? I mean, something that just stands out and says this is gotta go.
Yeah, I think the whole process around police complaints, like public complaints, in both criminal and in complaints that perhaps that are more conduct related than they are criminal related. So if we had, we're thinking about how do we professionalize policing, and do we, is there an ability to create basically almost like a college of physicians, but a college of police, so that we're professionalizing and looking at corrective behavior and, I guess, systems that will allow us to deal with conduct in a different way, in a more modernized way, and also oversight and how that is, and how perhaps, and I think it's quite clear in there that we're looking for, more civilian oversight in relation to public complaints, investigating of public complaints. Right now, we, of course, as you know, we have our Alberta Serious Incident Response teams that deal with some criminal matters, some not, and I think we're hoping that we can enhance that and build on that, because it's the old rhetoric, police investigating police, and how is that for public confidence and public trust and the whole piece. So it really is, we think, the launching point to getting that discussion going and asking the government to really take a serious look at this. It is a problem in our communities, and we're at a cusp now of we're trying to build trust in our communities and build confidence in policing, and any type of movement we can get in the Police Act to help us with that confidence and trust in our community members would be so beneficial.
What was your discussion on the marijuana legalization?
So the discussion was really more, it was the last that we just finished, actually. And it was actually the folks that are going around gathering the information in regards to what the province is saying about marijuana. And they're more giving us, informing us, and I think it was more questions from the chiefs than actual input at this particular stage. But they were just letting us know, I guess, what level they are at in the whole engagement process, and what Albertans are saying. And it's like I learned a few things. I didn't realize that as many Albertans that admit to smoking pot now, and how that looks. It was quite surprising for me, and I think a few of my colleagues. So it's a train that's coming, and we have to get ready for it. It's a very complicated, complex issue, as we all know, and I think I get a little more confidence today that they're working hard at building the proper framework, and they're consulting with Albertans, and they're consulting with all the stakeholders, including law enforcement or public safety, I'd like to use the term.
Police already have so much on their plate. How much extra work is this going to be? What's your biggest concern?
Well, again, I don't know that the devil's always in the details, and we didn't hear a lot of them today. It's the same issues. It's around impairment. It's around public enjoyment of public spaces. It's around, especially around youth and possession of cannabis with youth. And of course, the big one is impairment. And one of the big ones is impairment while driving, and the whole measurement piece around that. So, there's a lot out there that's unanswered, and I think everybody acknowledges that, but it looks like, as I said, the train's coming down the track, and we all need to do what we can to be as ready as we can for it.
Chief, just to go back to the opioid crisis for a moment. So if there's, for the person seeing that all these chiefs are getting together, talking about what's clearly a humongous crisis,
Yeah.
not just in this province, but in other provinces, for the family who's lost someone to the crisis or is dealing with it, would you say that the chiefs feel confident in being able to manage this crisis, or do they recognize that it's extremely, extremely difficult and they either need more, whether it's federal resources or federal engagement, what have you?
Yeah.
What was the big takeaway from the chiefs regarding how we're dealing with this crisis, and do you feel confident that you can manage it over the next however many months and years?
That's a great question, and it's a difficult one to answer. There's a lot of questions there, as you know. I think that the chiefs are very concerned about the crises, and I don't think that we feel that that we're solving the problem. We can't solve it alone, and I think that's the number one issue. But the number one consensus in the room is we can't solve this by ourselves. And we look at the area of the whole safe consumption sites that's going on right now. This is a conversation we never would have had 2 years ago, talking about people taking their illicit drugs to a safe place to consume them. But and the chiefs are, I guess, recognizing that again, it's almost like the legalization of marijuana. Times are a-changing, and we need to adjust. And it's about public safety and about harm reduction. And it's a tough piece. And what I can say is we get the sense that the provincial government and the federal government both seem to realize that this is a crisis. But as far as funding and proper funding, we could all say we always need more money. But I got to tell you, I think it's where do we spend the money? And I think that was some of our discussion as well. It's okay to throw money at something, but are we throwing it in the right place to reduce harm and make our communities safer? And we just, we need to be part of the discussion moving forward.
Any more questions for Chief?
Just, sorry, to go back to the Police Act. Do you guys in some ways feel like you're hitting your heads against a brick wall? This is something that we have heard about for quite some time now. And the College of Physicians example, that kind of seems like I'm looking at it right here. These are the chiefs of police.
Yeah.
You guys are the top in your fields across the province.
Mm-hmm.
What more does the province need from you guys? You guys are all saying this thing is outdated.
Yeah. Well, the first step is us to do what we did, and that's put a document together that outlines some of the recommendations. So we can talk all we want in the back room and rattle our sabers, but until we kind of throw a document together with a number of potential recommendations that make sense for Albertans and make sense, hopefully, for our officers, for the people we serve, now I think we can stand and say, okay, here's some recommendations. Here's a few recommendations of how we can move forward, and then we work from there. So, I think to label a sense of frustration wouldn't be fair. I think now that we've actually put something to paper and kind of came public with it, like we have just now, said here are some things I think we need to have conversation about and hopefully engage the government into looking at amendments to the Police Act. So we're hopeful that moving forward we're going to have some success in this area. We need to. It's not just about what the chiefs think. And we're hearing from the police associations, we're hearing from the community continually about the frustration and the cost associated with how we're now dealing and trying to work around this really antiquated act.
If you're standing here next year and nothing has been done, how are you going to feel?
Ask me next year.
Can we get a spelling of your first and last name, sir?
Andy McGrogan, it's Andy Y, McGrogan. That's the easiest question of the day. Thank God.
We have Chief Constable Roger Chapman as well. People have got questions.
Please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Okay, I'll just take questions.
So Chief, I guess we'll go back to the naming homicide victims. So of course, as we all know, Calgary named them. So with this framework, moving forward, I mean, do you see any possibility where we won't have homicide victims named?
Well, remember the whole issue was raised because of, as a topic got raised, have we actually looked properly at our structure and our system? So this at least gives us standing to say that, the chiefs believe, as I believe, that private or that public interest does not trump privacy. We have to figure out how they work well together, how these things work. So have we properly, soberly considered the issues at play before we release names? Ideologically, I don't believe it changes anything. I don't believe it changes anything for us, but it allows us a moment of reflection to say, have we done the right thing? Have we considered the right facets before we go ahead and do this? Remember, as police chiefs, we have a very significant responsibility to communities in their public interest, as you've asked before. You also have a significant responsibility to make sure we are not doing things without being well informed, respecting, which is probably one of the bigger issues in community these days, is the issues of privacy. Are we trying to run over privacy, or are we accepting that privacy is important? And we're well guided, we're well informed, and this is what this body looked at this last couple of days, is let's make sure we are singing from the same song sheet, we have the same facts before us, and allow each of us then to understand on a case-by-case basis how we're going to do this. Remember, there's a comment in there that I know you haven't had a chance to read it in detail. There's a comment in there that there's no such thing as a blanket policy. There's no other you will or you won't. Everything has to be considered on its own merits, and I think that's a responsibility we have to really grab onto.
Sir, I mean, we're often referred to as partners. I mean, you guys rely on us for things. Why was there no senior leadership from media in the city at the table when you guys discussed this?
The issue was really our particular responsibilities for our information and our data. I think, though, as you said, we're very open to hearing a more complex community take on this as well. I mean, the chiefs aren't here to tell you it's our way, the highway, but we do have to manage our responsibilities to our data, our information, and our business as we talk to you, as we connect with communities. If communities want to be heard on this thing more, we would welcome the conversation. I'd welcome to hear what other people think, but at the end of the day, we are stewards of the rule of law, and we have to make sure that we are not having one trump the other. Our goal is to balance the interests of public interest and the rule of law together. So.
Chief, this is Mr. Urban as well. sort of answered it, but essentially before Calgary was naming, and do you foresee that this may be a case where there's much less likely?
No, I think we'll ask for some scrutiny on a case-by-case basis is what we'll be doing. I think, again, the overarching responsibility, as you've said and as the document will point out, is serving the public interest. So we'll maintain that goal, but I will ask for some scrutiny to these things, make sure we have followed closely what we've asked here. What this brought light to is this got risen up publicly, is have we actually considered properly, have we matured ourselves around the evolving nature of privacy and the laws of privacy? These are not, policing does not try to run over top of privacy laws. We try to work very closely with them in the public interest as well, make sure that we are doing things that are in the global public interest. But I'll look at everyone, not personally, but we'll look at these things on a case-by-case basis. We'll think thoughtfully through them. But ideologically, I don't believe it changes anything for us. We just want to make sure we're as informed as possible so we can defend our decisions to do it or to not to do it. So.
Chief, are you any more reassured about the cannabis legalization?
As Chief McGorgan was saying, it's a very interesting discussion to hear now as we started getting into ideology, and I think we're very much past the days of saying, is this legalization make sense or not? That ship has sailed. We're talking now about provincial regulations, what role we're going to play as orders of government in administering this new scenario that Albertans are going to be faced with. So we talked a lot about things like, is it as important to grasp onto market share, or is it important to take a moral position in terms of the age limits and things like that? So we just offered some insight and some discussion on that. We're not being as prescriptive as we were just asking questions along those lines, making sure we knew what happened in terms of municipal governments, what their roles are going to be in terms of bylaws and enforcements. We just asked them more questions than they were asking us at this point. We just challenged back and forth a little bit about how this will affect communities, what our roles are going to be. I think this idea, particularly, I think a lot of the discussion came around this idea, is legalization going to push the black market out? Is it going to push organized crime out? And we know, just logically speaking, that's not likely going to happen in the early days. Maybe not in even the early years is that going to happen. But what are we going to do to manage that going forward? Whatever gap is left there between legalization and organized crime, what's our role going to be in that? So we'll have some time there to discuss that and work through that. I think we're pretty interested in, as Chief McGrogan said, we're pretty interested in how we're going to manage the drug-impaired driving issue, the per se limits, the technologies that we need to get on top of, training enough officers for to be drug recognition experts. These are all challenging things. We talked about who's going to pay for that. That was met with quietness in the room, so that's not to be unexpected. So we have challenges around resourcing and those sort of things that we're going to have to work through in the next days, weeks. So this timeline of July of 2018 sounds like a long ways away, but that rapidly is going to be upon us, and there's a lot of questions that will pass that time, but there's no way we're going to get to some answers by July of 2018. So we know we have to meet those timelines, be able to be responsive to the community, and keep working with these committees in the future to sort out some of the details that we're not sure about yet.
Could there be a lag in how soon you can start enforcing?
I don't believe we have ever been offered any opportunities for lag. So, I think we'll have to learn quickly, we'll have to adapt quickly and get moving. The enforcement regimes are quite a bit different in the legalized part of the act than the current laws are. So we'll start that education now. We'll also start understanding that, developing policies and procedures for our officers, but we'll start moving on that. And that's something that all chiefs needed to hear, is how we're going to do this together.
So you need some answers pretty quick.
Yes, but we're also very sober to say we get that you're asking for, from answers that they don't exist at this point. All they're asking for us is hear that out. Let's listen. Let's work together. What we're trying not to do is have different positions from one chief to the next. Have each chief have a different idea about how to approach these things. We try to work very collectively to make sure we're on line, so we're serving Albertans in a very similar fashion. So.
Chief, you mentioned resources. CPS has said in the past that they want more money. They need more money for frontline officers to deal with drug issues. With these new marijuana laws, if you don't get that money, what?
Well, everything's complex right now. I think as I've said before, absolutely, yes, we need more resources to manage the realities of the day, whether it's marijuana or opioids or any sort of complexity of policing. Certainly we do need these resources, but we are working with our commissions and our local governments to figure out what is the right budget scenario for us to meet these needs. The times are becoming very complicated. Their crime trends are the way they are. The kind of complex policing that has to go on today requires effort and resources, and But it's up to us to strike that balance between what we'd like to accomplish and what we're able to through budget constraints. And that's going to be our process now for the next several months, is trying to sort through that. So it is a tough ask.
Chief, we've heard from you in the past about the Police Act and a number of the specific issues that you've faced in dealing with the Police Act. Do you feel that the document you guys have put forward addresses all of those issues?
We had a choice to have the committee drill into the act line by line, or actually raise the discussion. Our overarching goal here is to get this on a legislative agenda into 2018. We simply believe that in the interest of all Albertans, that this act has to reflect their needs. We believe we all are policing in a community policing principles, but is our act, our guiding document, really aligned with the expectations of the community today? Is it really the model that most Albertans can say is the most relevant and the one they can be most proud of? And I just don't think it is. I think it's old enough, it's antiquated enough. The court-martialing regime and some of the pressures on the RHR systems that aren't addressed by this act need to be addressed. When you talk about diversity and fairness and equity in the workplace, the things that we've been dealing with in Calgary, as other agencies have been, we believe the act can address this better. The pressures on complaints and being heard in a timely, accurate way is important. Our members need to know that it's not draconian in nature. This sort of people can make mistakes or have issues of judgment that can be remediated and be more rehabilitative than it can be more punitive, that we can actually get to resolves in a way that makes sense to everybody. All these things are very important, and the act is very complex, but it affects everything we do. And we want to make sure that the government knows how serious the chiefs believe this is. The chiefs, that's why this group meets together, because one voice doesn't make a lot of sense. 9 or 10 voices telling the province that we really want them to pay attention to this and take some action quickly is something that we believe works, and that we know the minister listens to us when we talk as a collective voice, and that's why I'm more hopeful that this document gives us opportunities for discussion. And what we're trying to say is the police aren't telling you what the act should look like. The police are saying, as a body of police, we're saying this, here's things that we want you to look at and start discussing, but we believe the community wants to talk about this. I know our police associations and the membership want to talk about this, and likely the government wants to talk about this too, but what act would best represent the most modern body policing that Albertans could all be very proud of. And I think this is something we're really trying to be aggressive on and push the agenda items.
Chief, do you have any idea when the last amendment to the Police Act was?
We've over the years we've had pieces amended. We've had, even as ACERT came in, that was sort of dropped inside the act. And there's been the odd amendments to either the service regulations or the act itself. But the last time it's been looked at as a whole body of work has been likely decades. And we're not asking for amendments to pieces. We're asking for the act to be looked at as a whole body, as a whole document. So we can look at our economics, our HR systems, our disciplinary, our regimes, literally everything in there we want people to look at and say, is this the one that makes sense to Albertans right now?
Chief, can I ask a mundane crime?
Oh, I love mundane crimes.
So there's been a spike in B&Es here in Calgary. Can you account for that? What are the influences? And are investigators frustrated by catch and release of B&E offenders? Is that a mitigating factor or aggravating?
Well, property crimes are obviously one of the big issues for our city and as many of the cities in the province right now. I think we're happier, Gary, to hear that our trending over the last several months is on the downtrend. I've done a lot of work the last year and a half or so to put strategies in place so we can lower the presence of some of these property crimes and break-and-enters. We have seen some short-term upticks again over the summer. They can likely be attributed to prolific offenders that do these in multitude, to commit these crimes in multitude. So we put some effort to finding those prolific offenders and trying to deal with them. But overall, yes, there's been a huge amount of pressure that's very directly related to the presence of methamphetamine and fentanyl and presence of drugs and some of the downturn in our city right now. But we're making headway. Overall, we're making headway over the last, we're finding for the first time in a long time, we're dropped below the 5-year averages. If you saw the Eurostat numbers that came out, Calgary's certainly back heading to the direction it wants to be in terms of its place in the Canadian map around crime trends. So more good news than bad news, but lots of work to be done yet. So.
You mentioned the opioid crisis. The Cheesing Summer Festival is happening this weekend here at Maxville. There's been a lot of drug overdoses at that particular function. Are police concerned about that, or is there anything you can do proactively to make sure we don't have any overdoses?
Absolutely. We work closely with organizers and security teams on those events to try to deal with those situations. The unfortunate part is that the consumption of those drugs is very silent, very quiet. It's not like you're just going to see it happen. So it's identifying people at risk, getting paramedics in there when people are at risk, and managing that. I think the sadness is how many people are going to these drugs and using them in ways that are putting their lives at risk and putting other people's lives at risk. So yeah, we are very concerned about that. There's lots of events going on in this province right now, big concert type events, and you're always very concerned about health and safety and risk that people bring to themselves.
Okay.
Chief,
One more question?
yeah, Chief, yeah, sorry.
All right, sorry.
Chief, to start off with, I know that your force has been selectively naming and not naming homicide victims. This document here, how closely does it reflect the policy that your force has been working with?
It's fairly close. Some nuances, some changes. I think what has changed for us in that particular document is we should do a better job of describing how we arrive at the decision we arrive at. So we decide to name a name or withhold a name. How are we doing that? What's the process? And capturing that on paper. And that's a recommendation that came from the privacy commissioner. So I think that's something we can do. One of the other things is that survivors are victims, like family survivors are victims, and that's captured in that document as well as a definition.
What about the public's desire to know, when we hear there's a murder in our community, to put a name to who's been killed, isn't there a value to that?
There is, and I think we've got that particular document has, I think, 7 statements in it. The 7th statement lays out some particulars in there, and within that, it is important to be transparent, to be open, but you also have to respect the rights of the victims. And the victims are the person that has died. They have rights actually for 25 years, and of course the folks that survived those victims, the family members and such. So it's important to respect them. So it is all about striking that balance, and as my other 2 colleagues have suggested and stated, every case on its own merits. Every case will be different, and we have to look most particular at every case. And I think this document now actually does provide a checklist for us to go through.
Do you feel somewhat vindicated may not necessarily be the right word, but I know there's been some questions and criticism of the Edmonton policy. Do you feel like you've been heading down the right path all along, and you have the backing of your fellow police chiefs in what you've been doing?
Well, I guess as a police chief, you're always used to criticism. I think we've always tried to do the best job we can with the information we have and function within law and policy. And I think we've done that to the best of our abilities. I think this document helps us, I think the media did a good job here in saying, take a closer look at this, and is there a difference between a Calgary and an Edmonton and a Tabor and a Camrose? So, collectively now, I think we have a document we can work off, and we have a response that we can offer up as well. This is what we've done. This is how we collectively do it the same now. So I think you've helped us to up our game, and we're taking a really good look at this all the time. I think we were doing that before. I think this just requires us to pay more attention to it collectively.
I know that across Canada, newsrooms have been somewhat resistant to this idea. The Radio, Television, Digital News Association, when the RCMP embarked on a similar policy, was critical of it. Tell me, what would you say to those people who are in the business of telling stories, who may find themselves up against we're not releasing the name?
I think we have to defend why we're releasing the name, and conversely, we have to defend why we're not releasing the name. So I think it's about striking that balance, and it'll be different every time. I don't think we'll satisfy everybody every time. I think there'll be people that'll be dissatisfied with that, but I think it's important for us certainly to get the name out there when we can, because that's important. But we do have other considerations as well, and we always will default, obviously, to following the law. Police have to follow the law. We're stuck with that. I know one of the questions was, yeah, but the name's out there, whether a neighbor discloses the name or it gets disclosed in a hospital or whatever else. That's one way that it can get released. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, the police have to follow the law. You may not like it, somebody may not like it that we have to follow the law, but we have to follow the law. We kind of prefer everybody follows the law. But
Is there, just because we haven't had a chance to fully look over this, if a family, you guys have talked a little bit about how the survivors and family members are also considered victims. If a family asks outright for a name not to be released? What's the policy based on this?
Well, I think we'd have to consider the circumstances. So is there an investigational need to release that name? Because sometimes there is an investigational need to release that name. Is there an investigational need to hold the name back for a period of time? There's all those considerations. Obviously, the victims are the highest of priority, and the surviving families are the highest of priority, I think, for the community and for the police. And there's a humanity aspect to this as well, an ethical aspect of this too. What's the right thing to do for everybody involved? And that's the broader community as well as the individual.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.